This is Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby, and you're listening to the Love, Happiness, and Success podcast.
Both hands in the fire. I'm not who I used to be. That girl was a liar. She won't recognize me. I've been changed.
That was the song Relearn Me by Eda Pollo. Or Edipolo. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, but the song is gorgeous and it's the perfect, I thought, introduction to our topic today, because today we are going to be talking about how to create and maintain healthy boundaries in relationships. And I know that this is a topic of great importance because we hear about it all the time from our therapy and coaching clients here at Growing Self. A lot of people are working on this. And we've also had so many listener questions come through on Instagram, Facebook, on the blog at growingself.com around how to establish healthy boundaries in a way that allows you to have positive, high quality relationships and maintain really good connections with others. So that is where we're going on today's episode of the podcast. And I am so pleased to include in our conversation today my dear, dear friend and colleague at Growing Self, Kathleen Stutts. Kathleen and I have worked together for many years, and Kathleen is a true expert on the subject of healthy boundaries. She is a licensed professional counselor here, and she also does team trainings for us from time to time. And we have people from all over our group come and sit at Kathleen's feet to learn how it's done. And today she is sharing her wisdom with you. So, Kathleen, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I can't wait to talk with you about this topic of how to create healthy boundaries. I know that you frequently do this work with your clients. Again, you train others around this, but I can also attest as somebody who has had a personal relationship with you for many years that you live it.
Oh, thank you. Thanks very much. I take that as a very, very good compliment that means a lot to me.
It's good. You're like a role model for me. I'm like, I wish I could be more like Kathleen, because you like have so much clarity around like what you can do, what you can't do. And when you say no to me, I feel happy anyway. There's something about the way you say it. I'm like, oh, okay.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Well,
So it's definitely one of my passion topics, a topic I'm passionate about. And I love to talk about it. So I'm happy to be here.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, what do you say we take it from the top? Because I think sometimes just the term boundaries gets thrown around all over the place to mean all kinds of things. So from your perspective, what do boundaries mean? What is a boundary in the sense of, what we do? Because sometimes, like, and it's an aside, sometimes I think people use the word boundaries. It's like telling other people what to do can be a boundary, or like, definitely. Like, don't say this to me can be like a boundary. But what do you think of as being like a boundary, a reasonable boundary?
You're right. Right. You're so right. I can't tell you how often I hear professionally, but personally too, that people have so many different either negative associations with boundaries about, that's a barrier. It means that something is wrong. It means conflict, or just complete, they come by it honestly, but just misunderstandings about what boundaries are. So to me, a boundary is, it's this healthy and clear understanding of what you need to do to take care of yourself, what you're in control of, and what you're not in control of. So it's just this healthy, clear understanding of, the things that I can empower myself around versus the things I need to practice radical acceptance around or letting go of. And so having that understanding between you and any person in your life, in any situation. And I know that sounds very abstract, right? But That's because we can we can use boundaries and we can assert boundaries in so many different ways in different situations, and they do change and flux in different relationships as needed, right? So we can get into the details of it more, but from a starting point, that's sort
Mhm.
of the general way that I think about boundaries.
Yeah. Well, thank
Mhm.
you for clarifying that. Um, and yeah, okay, so then let's start with this other question. Why do you think so many people, particularly women, but many men too,
Mhm.
really struggle to have that clarity that you describe and then also communicate that effectively to others? That just the whole thing feels incredibly fraught to people. Why is it so
Yeah.
hard?
I think it's because, and I'm going to say we, because I think this is a human experience, you know.
Yeah.
I think it's because we're afraid of losing people, honestly. And whenever I talk with people about what is so scary about boundaries, that's always where they go.
Mm.
You know, ultimately, I'm afraid people won't like me. I'm afraid it's going to cause an argument or I'll lose that relationship. So because we are, wired to attach and we need people as the social creatures that we are, I
Yeah.
think the fear of putting those relationships at risk is what underlies the fear of setting boundaries and being assertive, because there are misconceptions around what boundaries are, what assertiveness is, and what it can do for us. People think that it is a threat to those relationships rather than something that protects them, which
Yeah.
I think is a misunderstanding, an unfortunate misunderstanding. But ultimately, that fear of losing people, I think, is really what makes it scary.
That is so insightful. There's almost a subconscious thing. It's if I say no, or if I ask for what I need, it's going to damage my relationship with you. And you're saying that is a misunderstanding. Um,
Yes.
and this actually brings me to another question. So one of the things that I loved so much, well, I love so many things about your team training that you did with us on this topic, but you had this saying in your presentation, which is that good, decent people set boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And you had this as like a concept. And I wanted to ask you, why do you think it's so important to teach people, to teach our clients that good people set boundaries? Why?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Because one of the misunderstandings that's so prevalent around assertiveness and boundary setting is
Mhm.
that it is aggressive or mean or even overly confident or bullyish, um, and that you don't set boundaries if you're nice, or you can't be nice to people and be liked by people and be assertive. And I think what's happening there is that there's a confusion between assertiveness and aggressiveness. You know, you
Mm.
mentioned earlier people using the idea of boundaries as telling people, hey, you can't do that to me, or you can't say that to me. That's not really assertiveness. That's a little bit of bullying, actually.
Hmm.
And so I think all of the confusion between assertiveness and aggressiveness leads to the idea that you can't be nice and set boundaries, which just simply isn't true. And as a matter of fact, to be nice, I think you really even need to set boundaries, right? Because if I'm not setting boundaries, I'm going to grow. And I think we're all good. I'm sure many people have experienced this personally.
Mhm.
We grow tired, we get burnt out, we grow resentful. This can be in our
Yeah.
personal lives, in our professional lives, and we're not very nice, and we don't show up as our best selves, and we don't have anything left to give the people that we do care about, right? So I think that the misunderstanding or the confusion between assertiveness and aggression is the underlying cause there, but that in fact, to be nice, we actually need to set boundaries.
Oh, I love the way you say that like you're not doing anybody any favors by not setting boundaries, and that really when you don't set boundaries, it's impossible to show up as, I mean, hate to use this phrase, but this is what's coming to mind, but as like your best self in relationships, because you're going to be exhausted and resentful and depleted if you're not able to know what your limits are and communicate those. So that's part of having positive, healthy relationships, is actually being good at boundaries, that those two things go together.
Yes, and
Yeah.
as a matter of fact, right, what can happen is if we are if we tend to be people pleasers and have anxiety in our relationships around that, say around how our relationships are going, being liked by people, making sure there's no conflict, that there's always harmony, that we're in a good space. If you find yourself feeling worried or anxious about that and not saying no or setting boundaries, but because of that, um, what that actually tends to lead toward are the very fears and problems in those relationships that we're so scared of happening, right? It's kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Ooh, yeah, I could
Yeah.
totally see that. Well, and another theme that I'm hearing as we're talking is this concept of assertiveness. And we could probably talk about assertiveness versus aggressiveness, but first, you've used that word a lot. What do you mean by
Mhm.
assertive?
So we are assertive when we treat ourselves with respect, when we
Mm,
um, when we respect our basic human rights and needs,
yeah.
while also respecting the rights and needs of others. And when we do that, we're being assertive. We're also opening up the opportunity to have clear and open communication
Hmm.
and compromise and negotiation with the other person on how we can achieve that win-win where we can both be treated with respect and both take care of ourselves in that situation. But in a nutshell, assertiveness is when we're taking care of ourselves while respecting other people.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, aggression, on the other hand, is when we are taking care of ourselves while not respecting the basic rights or needs or boundaries of the other people in the situation.
That makes so much sense. And I've never thought about it that way. The core aggression is taking care of you without thinking about the person on the other end of it.
Yes,
Yeah.
and on the other end of that spectrum, when we're being passive, when we're taking care of others and putting their needs first
Mm,
to the detriment or neglect of our own, right? So
yeah.
we kind of end up with this sort of continuum here with
Hmm.
passive on one end, aggressive on the far other end. And assertiveness is that sweet spot, that balance right in the middle
Hmm.
where we can say, I'm okay and you're okay, and hold space for each other's feelings and needs, knowing that we're each responsible for ourselves.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you just used that word, that responsibility, because I'm hearing that to be assertive, it requires a high degree of like self-awareness, respect for self, respect for other. But there's like this responsibility component.
Yeah.
Whereas I kind of got the sense when you were talking about the passive perspective that it's people like and well intentioned, like really legitimately doing what they feel is best and trying to prioritize relationships, maybe, or trying to be the air quote nice person. But
Mm-hmm.
they're in some ways like by over giving or not having almost like having more respect for other people than themselves. There's like this abdication of responsibility a little bit. Have you found that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm.
It is our responsibility to take care of ourselves. Just that
Yeah.
in itself is a new way of looking at things,
Hmm.
I think sometimes. But absolutely, it's kind of like if you're at work, for example, and you try to do everything, and you try to do everything all at once and you try to do everyone's job because you want to be really great at what you do, you end up not doing some of the basic things you really needed to get to, or a lot of things fall through the cracks, right? Because we can't do it all. And in fact, in this analogy, taking care of other people's basic needs and rights is not really your responsibility, because it's not really in your control and it's not realistic. So trying to do it means that while you might have the best of intentions, you end up neglecting this core sort of foundational responsibility over here, which is you. And that is in your control, right? We have the best of intentions, but that really important piece that's sort of the foundation of the rest of your life gets neglected.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, tell us more about the emotional experience of having that kind of, to use your word, like passive orientation, because I think that people who sort of lean toward the aggressive end of the continuum are probably not the ones listening to this podcast. Except that, I mean, and I have seen this, as a therapist and as a coach, that sometimes people who have a really passive orientation can like get to a certain point where they become aggressive, like they kind of swing, back and forth a little bit. But for the benefit of somebody listening to this podcast and trying to figure out where they are on that continuum, I mean, what have you heard your clients say that maybe come to you for help with boundaries, with who are, without maybe even realizing it, doing a lot of the things that keep them stuck on that passive end of the spectrum? I mean, like, what does that feel like? But also, what do you see them doing that is unintentionally creating that situation, but before they have the benefit of working with you, Kathleen, to get much better at this? But like, where's the starting point?
Well, first, let me say that I can answer this question from a personal space, right? Because the reason I'm so passionate about boundaries is because I'd love to say that, yeah, this is what it's like, all the wonderful compliments you gave me at the beginning of our talk, but I'm always working on boundaries. I don't always set the best boundaries. And I've been a people pleaser and can be a people pleaser, right? So this is important to me, and I like to help people with it because I'd like to think I have some empathy around what it's like, right? So whether it's from a personal place or what clients have shared, what family members have shared, friends, right? I think that being in that passive place where we're not taking care of ourselves feels really exhausting. And it feels really anxious. Anxiety comes to mind a lot because we're scrambling around trying to manage things that we don't have control over, trying to prevent the outcomes that we're so afraid of happening. So anxiety comes up a lot, but exhaustion, and inadequacy. If I had to pick three big feeling words, those would be the three, right? Because never enough, never good enough. Again, because we're trying to do the impossible, quite frankly, right? So I think that's how people feel. If, to give you a short answer, there are a lot of emotions in that: guilt, shame, resentment, and anger, as well. Because what we're doing, what it looks like is, saying yes when you really need to say no, stretching yourself too thin and taking on too much. I think a lot of those things that we might think of off the top of our heads when we think about people pleasing, but also it looks like reading every little, nonverbal cue in your significant other when you think they might be in a bad mood, and thinking, oh no, that's not okay, I need to fix that. Or keeping a long to-do list and, beating yourself up at the end of the day because you didn't manage to get enough things done and also help your neighbor and your best friend and, run your parents' errands for them. Do everything on your list and be that exceptionally functioning person who helps everybody, right?
And showers.
And shower, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it also looks like not speaking up too, right? Not being so scared of having direct communication because you're so afraid of conflict. or
Mm-hmm.
making look, or someone else feeling uncomfortable or unhappy, possibly with you, that we don't speak up. We stay silent. We stuff our feelings, sweep things under the rug.
Mm-hmm.
Those are just a few examples I think that
Yeah.
probably a lot of people can relate to.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I can certainly relate to the part about, I think the guilt is always what gets me, that like, well, I
Mhm.
could do it. If I rearranged some of my personal priorities, I could do this for you and therefore I should.
Uh,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah,
that's such a great example.
that's my Achilles heel for sure. But okay, so oh, you were about to say something.
Oh, just that's such a great example. Just because we can do something doesn't mean that we should. Um, I think that even that idea that I could, um, even if it means, right, that I'm not taking care of myself, or I'm going to have these negative consequences as a result, but I could do it, so therefore I should.
Hmm.
Um, I think, right, is one of those not necessarily accurate beliefs that a lot of us hold, but isn't it also connected to the idea that if somebody else needs us, needs help, is unhappy with us, or even just experiencing any kind of negative or uncomfortable emotion,
Hmm.
that sort of trumps most other things? Isn't that
Yeah.
something that I think is is sort of in the background as a belief or a feeling, even when we
Hmm.
want to people please, when we feel guilty?
Yeah. Yes, and I'm hearing in what you just said, and it occurred to me a couple of minutes ago when you were talking about like the anxiety component of that passive orientation. There's some kind of relationship here with codependence and having trouble setting boundaries. I think I'm hearing in this. Is that true?
Sure. Oh, sure. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, codependency
Hmm.
is another one of those terms that is misunderstood
Yeah.
sometimes. And that makes sense because it is a broad term that can refer to a lot of different things.
And totally non-scientific, by the way. The
True,
codependence is nowhere in the DSM, but
right?
yeah.
It's a self-help term, I guess. But I find it helpful to simplify it and think of codependency as a lack of healthy, clear boundaries
Yeah.
in your relationships.
Hmm.
So definitely, right?
Yeah.
I think for me, I literally define codependency as a boundary issue.
Well, it really is. It's that what where do I stop and you start? That
Mhm.
what is my responsibility and what is your responsibility, and can I function independently even if, like going back to your point just a minute ago, even if you're upset and not feeling good,
Right.
that is maybe not actually my problem to solve. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There are all these beliefs that we sort of take for granted that are at the root of codependency, of not having clear boundaries, that your feelings are mine to solve, that having uncomfortable feelings is just catastrophic. We've got to do something about it.
Yeah.
Um, that if I can do something, I should do something. And none of those are actually necessarily always true. Um, this is the part I'm just thinking out loud here. This is the part in our conversation where I have this feeling that people are wondering,
Hmm.
yeah, but that sounds pretty cold. Or, how do you be there and support somebody that you care about? Aren't their feelings your responsibility if you care about them, or shouldn't you care about their feelings? Those kinds of questions. And so I think it's just a good time to say that you can care about someone, what they're feeling, what they're going through, if they're
Hmm.
struggling. You can even show up for them and support them without taking ownership or responsibility for their feelings or situation, while having clear, healthy boundaries. That those things are not exclusive.
Yeah. Oh, what an important message that you can care very much about how somebody's feeling and even help them in healthy
Mhm.
ways, but without taking on their problems as your own. That's
Exactly.
huge. Oh,
Exactly. Yeah. And so, I mean, look, I understand it's easier to talk about that than it is to do, as so many things are.
right.
Right. So having healthy boundaries and being assertive while still caring for people and supporting them requires a lot of self-awareness and mindfulness and a lot of emotional regulation,
Mhm.
right? To be able to feel your feelings and still and feel empathy or
Mhm.
concern or worry or for this person that's in your life, whomever they might be, and hold those feelings, carry them with you without them taking over and sort of becoming the driver in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
Feeling those feelings, but still showing up in your behavior and your words with assertiveness and
Mhm.
healthy boundaries.
Yeah. Whew. Well, and as you brought up, Kathleen, very much easier to talk about this than it is to actually put it into practice. And I mean, I know that the path of growth in this area is far beyond the scope of what can be learned through a podcast, right? I mean, I know that you have worked as a therapist and as a coach for, I mean, years sometimes with people who are really working to develop these skills. So and I just want to say that to people listening, because sometimes I feel like, they're like, I am all for self help and kind of advice and sharing ideas. But I think sometimes people feel like if they heard it or like, oh, this is what Kathleen said, so I should be able to do this, like it was
Mm,
easy. I don't want anybody to feel badly if they can't just magically do these things that Kathleen is sharing. Okay, this is a
right.
growth process. But with that, I mean, Kathleen, if you were to start with a client as either like a life coach or a therapist who is really working specifically on boundaries, what would you imagine the arc of the work would look like with that person? Like what kinds of things would you guys be working on or talking about first? And then how would that evolve over time? And not that you have to, talk through every moment of the growth process and everybody's different,
Mm,
but like, what are
sure.
some of the starting places that you've experienced with clients?
Gosh, I think that one of the starting places is probably because if we struggle with assertiveness, we tend to beat ourselves up quite a bit,
Mm-hmm.
right? Self-compassion is in short supply.
Yeah.
And so one of the starting points is really understanding, why do I feel this way? Why do I struggle with standing up for myself? Why am I feeling resentful, jealous, bitter, angry, burnt
Mm-hmm.
out, guilty? Um, why am I feeling that? And where did I learn these kinds of, just this way of showing up in my relationships? Because it's
Mm-hmm.
important, I think, to, if self-compassion is stepping back and looking at the whole context, considering the full picture, to see yourself as with compassion. Look, I learned this stuff. This was passed on to me. I learned to
Mm-hmm.
think about relationships this way. I learned this is how I need to be for
Mm-hmm.
people to treat me well or to get my needs met. These are the sort of unspoken rules that were taught to me about being a nice person or finding love,
Yeah.
right? And so that's usually where we start.
Yeah, just this whole exploration process of unpacking, like, how do I feel? Why do I feel this way? Where did these beliefs come from? So there's just like a whole, like, self-discovery is the word that's coming to mind with in a
Mm-hmm.
very compassionate way. That how do I make sense? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
And learn and self-validation too.
Yeah.
Like, these feelings make sense. It's okay. Not only is it okay and valid, and I'm still a good person and a nice person, um, but it makes sense too, that I'm angry or resentful. Those are the big feelings that come up a lot when we aren't setting boundaries that we then have feelings about, right? And so it becomes this negative snowball. So a lot of validation. Um, and also a lot of, this is one of the other sort of starting areas because they kind of do overlap. Surprises. I guess I'll just call it surprises. People are often surprised to learn new perspectives on this, like the idea that we can be nice and assertive, or that we need to be assertive in order to be nice. So just even that process of shifting your paradigm, your perspective, and looking at boundaries and assertiveness in relationships in new and different ways. And it can become sort of this eye-opening experience. And I have seen what a relief it can be.
Yeah, these new ideas can be so liberating, and I'm thinking of a moment in my own life where I felt like I'd been struck by lightning. It was this idea, and I think it probably from my work in becoming a therapist potentially, but I think also supported by like the whole Montessori. We're a Montessori family, so very much around this idea, but the idea of like that somebody else's emotional experience, like a painful emotional experience, can actually be an incredibly positive thing. Because if they feel badly, then they become motivated to do their growth work or healing or learn or change something. And that if I am trying to like rescue and fix and make it better and overstep and whatever, that I'm actually depriving them of the opportunity to have that motivation and to have that kind of self-directed growth, like if I take away their natural consequences. That idea totally changed my life, and I think made it a lot easier for me to set boundaries personally, just going back to what you're saying. And I hadn't thought about that until you just mentioned like those surprises, and I'm sure that they're very different for different people, but that was a huge one for me, this idea that pain is positive. Like that, like, that changed a lot of things for me. So you're saying in your work with clients, you help them kind of work through those old beliefs and find new ones that are liberating in similar ways, maybe.
Absolutely. And that is such a good one.
It's
right?
For me, yes.
Yeah. I think I've definitely had that in my own way. I had that moment too, where I came to that emotional understanding, not just intellectual understanding of those really difficult feelings are good. They can be good. They're definitely necessary. And that when we try to rescue people from them, we're taking away, we're violating some of their rights, to feel bad. And go through that growth process. A good, what is this? A metaphor that I found at some point and love and use sometimes is that of the butterfly in the cocoon. I don't know if you've heard this one, but
I don't think so. Tell me.
Sorry,
your cats have heard the story of them, but they would like to tell us their thoughts on this.
I've got to set good boundaries with them when I'm working.
How do you set boundaries with cats? That's to be continued, right?
Exactly, right. But when a butterfly, when a caterpillar has changed into a butterfly and is ready to break free of its cocoon, it will struggle to sort of shed that cocoon and break free and fly away. And if we were to stumble across that and say, oh wow, that butterfly is struggling, it needs help, I'm gonna rescue it, I'm gonna help it because it feels good for me, and I'm gonna do that, we steal away from the butterfly the opportunity to strengthen its wings through that natural process, that slow process, that challenging process. And it won't be ready to fly, and it will possibly not make it, right? It's that risk vulnerable
Yeah.
because it hasn't gone through those literal growing pains, right?
Yeah. So you're saying that that's like actually how the butterfly's muscles develop is through
Mm-hmm.
that exercise of liberating itself from the
Mm-hmm.
chrysalis. I did
Exactly.
not know that. But
Right.
what a perfect metaphor that if you're like, oh, I'll
Mm-hmm.
save you, that the butterfly then is like, thanks, and crashes to the ground. And so
Right.
like, yeah.
Right. Right.
Oh,
And it feels good to help. And it feels good for us to help people
yeah.
usually, right? And it feels bad to see someone suffer if you're a good, kind person and you have empathy.
Hmm.
But acting on that is not always the right or nice thing to do,
Yeah. Yeah.
for others or possibly for yourself too.
Mm.
Yeah. And so that's a good example.
Oh, this is such an important idea.
Mm.
And I also, just knowing my listeners, they're very practical folks. We are, if we don't talk about this, Kathleen, we're going to get questions
Yeah.
asking us, can you please give us some examples of healthy boundaries in action? What does this look like? We should talk about this now
Okay.
to just go ahead and get it out of the way.
All right.
What?
Okay, yes.
Hmm.
Well, let's start with with this example that we're talking about just now,
Hmm.
which is maybe seeing someone that we care about struggle.
Hmm.
How do we care and support with healthy boundaries? That looks like, um, and I'm just full of metaphors today, but let's imagine that um, they're swimming, and I'm going to get practical and real here in just a second. But
Hmm.
so let's imagine that they're swimming in choppy waters and struggling. If we jump in there with them, right, we might both go down.
Yeah.
So in that case, how would you support them? You might throw them, a lifesaver, or perhaps they're, I don't know, swimming in a triathlon. You might stand on the sidelines and cheer them on, see if they need anything that you can give them. And so with that, having healthy boundaries might sound like, I'm so sorry that you're going through this. I can see this is really difficult for you. I hate to see you in pain. Empathy. Is there anything I can do for you? What can I do for you? Um, and and at that point, you may or may not be able to give that thing to them that they're asking for. That depends, and the assertiveness continues on from there. We can talk
Hmm.
about that, how to say no assertively and so forth. But
Yeah.
supporting someone looks like
Hmm.
supporting them from the sidelines.
Yes. And offering to help in the way that you can. But I'm also hearing like the next thing here. So that would be like one example of setting a boundary.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think like what I hear a lot of from my clients, and I'm sure you do too,
Mm-hmm.
is this question around, well, I've set a boundary with someone and now they're doing the thing anyway. So like going back to your
Mm-hmm.
example, you say, yeah, let me know how I can help you, friend. And the friend doesn't maybe say this, but they do start calling you at 11 o'clock at night, sobbing hysterically and wanting to tell you all about the everything and texting you like 9 times a day and being annoyed with you when you don't respond right back, or asking you to do things that are actually starting to interfere with your life and ability, and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm imagining Kathleen would say being appropriately assertive would be like, 11 is pretty late for me. I'm usually in bed at that time. I'm happy to talk with you when I'm free. Can I call you, on the way home from work sometimes in the afternoon? I'm in the car anyway. And you have this
Mm-hmm.
nice conversation. And then the next day, your phone rings at 11:30 at night.
I see.
What
Mm-hmm.
would Kathleen do? Because that's the thing that I hear a lot about with my clients. It's like, well, I told my mother-in-law to not talk to me that way anymore, or I
Right.
told so and so to not do this. And I think people sometimes feel that setting that boundary is like requesting something of someone else,
Ah.
and then
Mm-hmm.
when that somebody doesn't do the something else, then they're like, what do I do?
Stuck. Still stuck and feeling helpless. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
like what's your take on that
Okay.
aspect of it? So
Yeah.
like please don't call me at 11. Ring
Well,
ring.
first of all, that was a great example. The way that you verbalized that was beautiful, right? But they keep calling anyway. You gotta when that happens, the beautiful thing about boundaries is that it is not really requesting something of somebody.
Mm-hmm.
It is letting them know what to expect from you. This is what I'm going to do, and this is what I'm not going to do.
There it is.
Right. So if they're not respecting the initial boundary and they continue to call you at 11:30, okay, I asked you not to call me that late because, I'm usually in bed by then. And I know that you're going through a really difficult time. I'm not able to talk at that time. Here's when I can support you, or I will call you during this time. If you keep calling me at 11:30, I'm going to have to, and then you can fill in the blank with a boundary that you feel you can follow through on.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really important with setting boundaries, is that whatever you choose, it's something that you can stick to.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever that is, wherever you are with that is okay. So maybe it's, I'm going to have to turn my phone off at night, or it may be something a little bit, let's say, more drastic. I'm not going to be able to talk with you if you don't respect
Mm-hmm.
this boundary. It depends on the person and the situation. If you have somebody who's really actually getting angry with you and criticizing you because you didn't text back right away, or you're still not picking up the phone at 11:30 even when you asked them not to call at that time, that's a pretty difficult situation. I just want to validate that if you're experiencing something like that,
Yeah.
that's a pretty toxic relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And those are harder to be assertive in.
Yeah.
And it's giving you information. When someone doesn't respect your boundaries, it's giving you information about if that relationship is healthy for you.
Yeah.
So I just want to
Yeah.
context that.
No, that's good to say that that's actually a sign of an unhealthy relationship, is like when you say, please don't do this, or please respect me in this area, and somebody continue not just to do it, but gets upset with you for setting boundaries. Like
Yeah,
you should actually be paying attention to that, is what I'm hearing you say. Yeah.
absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a red flag. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
But to answer your question directly, we set boundaries when they're not respected. We need to up the ante and
Mm.
set a boundary that's, if you want to call it, a little further out, if you will, and let them know, not to be patronizing, but just as you would maybe disciplining a
Mhm.
child. If you don't do this, here's the next consequence.
Yeah.
So if you don't stop calling me in the middle of the night, I'm gonna have to shut off my phone. If if you don't stop talking to me that way, I'm gonna have to take a break from our relationship for a
Yeah.
while. Let them know what it is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're having trouble upping the ante, so to speak, or finding a boundary that you feel you can follow through with, or struggling with a difficult person
Mm-hmm.
like this, that's something to work with a coach or a counselor around, because
Yeah.
it's pretty difficult at that
It,
at that level.
it,
Mhm.
it really is. And I think also just to, like many people experience these kinds of dynamics with their families. So it's
Mhm.
like sort of people that you're, um, it's hard to like, and it can be done. I mean, some people limit relationships with certain family members and it's a positive
Mhm.
thing, but it can be a sticky situation for many.
Mhm.
So, but that's good advice.
Mhm.
And then oh my gosh, we could talk about so many different aspects of this, Kathleen, but I want to reiterate what I'm hearing you say, which is um, setting boundaries is not about controlling anybody else. It is about deciding what you're going to do and what you're okay with and how you're going to communicate that. And then
Mhm.
you being responsible for your actions.
Exactly.
That we can't actually control others.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Healthy boundaries, non-codependent boundaries are assertive boundaries rather than passive or
Mhm.
aggressive ones, are about taking care of yourself and making sure everybody knows what that's going to look like. It's not about bargaining with people or getting certain reactions out of them or even asking things of them.
Yeah.
And even when we compromise, again, that is, well, here's where I can meet you. Where can you meet me? Is there a place that overlaps?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, so much good stuff. Well, and I want to be respectful of your time. Do you have time to tackle a little listener question with me
Sure.
for a couple
Yeah.
minutes? Okay.
Mhm.
So with all of these things in mind, we had someone get in touch. I'm not sure if it was through Instagram. It may have been through the blog at growingself.com. Um, but this person writes, my hope is to be able to have a healthy relationship where I'm not sabotaging things or letting my anxiety ruin it. But a big piece of this is me getting better in my ability to maintain healthy boundaries and also be comfortable asking people to meet my needs while at the same time being able to meet theirs. Um, what are a couple of things that I could do to get better around the boundary aspect of this? And you know what? Just as I read this question out loud to you, my immediate reaction is that this is not an answerable kinds of question. This is like enter into this growth process that will probably take a while. Is that your reaction to this question, or am I maybe there
Yes.
is an easy answer. I don't know.
Well, based on what this person is saying, I'm hearing that, you know, sabotaging relationships and anxiety. So
Mhm.
I'm think I'm hearing they're saying that their anxiety around asking for what they need, setting boundaries, etc. There might be other stuff there, creates the sabotage. So this is a
Yeah,
complicated,
faceted.
multi-layered
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, that being said, though, and maybe this is because I've been reading Brene Brown. Maybe it's because a quote that I saw earlier today. I wish I could pull it up real quick. But what's coming to my mind is that, when we set boundaries assertively, which is still nice and kind and compassionate and all of that good stuff, we are being authentic, right? And that means that we're opening up the opportunity to have intimacy and closeness with that person.
Mm.
And that can be scary and it can feel risky. And sometimes, when we avoid that, we end up sabotaging those relationships anyway.
Yeah.
But sometimes we need to sort of dip our toe in that vulnerability pool and see how the person reacts to get some. I'm not talking about let's move my boundaries based on how they react, but rather let's see, is this person safe?
Yeah.
And if they do respond with love and compassion, respect, empathy, validation, and respect my boundaries, then maybe next time I can lean into my anxiety a little bit more and express a little bit of a need that makes me a little bit more scared and see what happens. Like learning to feel less anxious if your partner is a healthy partner for you and a safe partner. We can ease into the practice of setting boundaries and expressing our needs in relationships.
That is amazing. Yeah. And you're saying to do reality testing. What
Mm-hmm.
happens when I do
Yeah.
ask for something? And then there's almost like this exposure therapy component. Like every time I ask and it's positive, I'm kind of um, like healing those old ideas about who I need to be and
Yeah.
what boundaries mean, because it is actually okay. And it's like that healing in the
Right.
context of a healthy relationship.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Reality testing, exactly. Especially if you've been with this person for a while already and you know them well. Are they someone who can hold space for your needs and respect your boundaries and still, what's the word I'm looking for? Still have a strong sense of self
Mm-hmm.
and a hearty self-esteem in order to stand by your side in that. If the evidence is there for that, then it's appropriate to slowly lean into that anxiety.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a process.
Definitely. And if they can't, or they fall apart, or they get mad at you or try to punish you, I will refer you back
Right.
to the recent episode of the podcast in which I discussed narcissism.
Yeah.
And there's also one about when to call it quits in a relationship. Just saying. That
Yeah,
might not be the
that
case, but
right. No, that's a really good
yeah.
point, right? All of those things are not okay.
Not okay.
Right? I feel like we don't say that enough, right? Hearing things like, well, defensiveness, even just defensiveness, right? We all feel defensive sometimes. I think that's a natural human emotion.
Mm-hmm.
But again, can your partner feel defensive and still be self-aware enough and regulate to show up with love and respect?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, I'm feeling defensive and I want to be here for you. So let me take a moment and come back. Or I notice I'm feeling defensive and, your feelings are valid and really important to me. Or something like that, right? But acting defensive with minimization and validation, blame shifting, that's not okay.
Not okay. Yeah.
And you don't have to live with it.
What a powerful message, and what a nice note for us to land on, this beautifully just affirming and empowering conversation about boundaries and what they are, and the path to growth around them. But that also, I mean, that's a big takeaway from me, that, if you encounter these kinds of reactions in someone when you're trying to set healthy and appropriate boundaries, it's not you, it's them.
Yeah.
And to not get tricked into believing otherwise. That's an important message for a lot of people to hear. I think especially some women.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. And that's a great point. It's not a reflection of you or the appropriateness of your boundary.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we could talk for a much longer. So this is such an interesting conversation, and maybe we can revisit this topic and have a part 2 at some point. But I really
That would be
appreciate
awesome.
your time today. This is wonderful.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate being able to be here and talk about this. And it has been, I think, fun. This is my idea of a good time, anyway.
Mine too. We're letting our nerd flags fly, right. Kathleen. I love it.
Right.
Well, I had a good time too. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.